Hi, and welcome to the Restorative Wellness Clinicians Corner, video series exclusively for functional health professionals, where we interview the top experts in the latest research, products, tools, and best practices for getting your clients exceptional results. Welcome, everybody. I am super excited about tonight's Restorative Wellness Clinicians Corner interview. We have the incredible Dr. Beverly Yates here with us. Dr. Beverly, can you say hi so everyone can see you?
Hey, everybody. Oh, look at the Zoom feature.
Look at that. That's awesome. All the new features. So I want to share a little bit about Dr. Beverly's background. She is a licensed doctor of naturopathic medicine, the nation's leader in online type 2 diabetes care, and she is on a mission to help 3 million people heal from type 2 diabetes and pre-diabetes. Now, she used her background in MIT electrical engineering and her work as a systems engineer in Silicon Valley, and we're going to ask you how you got from there to here, to create effective online programs for people with diabetes to achieve blood sugar control and live the life that they love. Dr. Yates is an internationally recognized speaker and expert in diabetes and heart disease. She's a published author of Heart Health for Black Women, a natural approach to healing and preventing heart disease. She's the co-author of multiple books, including with Jack Canfield, The Soul of Success, Volume 2. Dr. Yates is writing a new book on type 2 diabetes and prediabetes based on her Yates Protocol, focusing on the 5 practical, enjoyable steps to reversing type 2 and prediabetes and living the life that you love. She has been featured in all the major media news outlets. You can hear her on oodles of podcasts. She is fantastic. I love Dr. Yates. I'm super excited about having you here because, as I was saying before we hit the go live button, I just love the way that you explain these concepts in ways that are just, they're unique and they're really graspable. So we do have an audience here of clinicians. They're familiar with these concepts, but we're always looking for new ways and layers of understanding and ways of making these really challenging ideas graspable for our clients. So welcome. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Margaret. What a lovely introduction. I really appreciate your warm, friendly, professional invitation to come and be a part here and share with your community. I'm looking forward to connecting and finding out what are people's concerns, what are your areas of joy, your question marks, your frustrations, because I think when you're working with things that are so sensitive to lifestyle in the realm of metabolic health, it's challenging when it comes to blood sugar management. This is actually not the easiest thing to wrangle, that's for sure.
No, it is not. Where I actually want to start, I want to hear your story because I'm here like MIT trained electrical engineer to naturopathic doctor. Like, share us that journey. That is not the normal career path.
It's so funny that you asked that. That is usually the first place people start in finding out, what it is that I offer over all these years, right? 30 plus years of clinical work. And actually, there's several of us in the profession who've come from electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, et cetera, into naturopathic medicines. And we have often a similar background. So mine was this. I was working in Silicon Valley as systems engineer for a company that made supercomputers, right? And in that journey, we moved from Silicon Valley to the Silicon Forest, the Pacific Northwest, specifically Portland, Oregon, into the suburbs. At that time, the tech community there was starting to grow. What I did not know is that I'm very sensitive, it turns out, to mold, particularly the kind that grows up there. And my fiance and I were renting a house and, excited about our upcoming wedding, all these wonderful things happening. And I got so fatigued, rain fatigued, lost my energy, loss of mental clarity. And I had this weird sneeze, a deep sneeze, such a deep sneeze. It hurt my abdominal wall. And at the time I was beyond fit. You talk about somebody in shape, an athlete, right? So I was like, what in the world is racking me like this? And so I went to see an allergist thinking that was the path to go down. Conventional medicine, see an allergy doc. So between him and his nurse, they did this skin scratch test. Later come to find out that if you scratch your skin, it will wheal. Anything will show up as positive. I'm like, what the hell kind of science is this? But anyway, now I know. I didn't know that at the time. So, they did that, looked at the arm, and convinced me that I was allergic to any number of things, right? So then they were going to do this desensitization protocol and shoot me up with all sorts of things. And I went through this for about a year. But the scientist in me was like, well, why are we doing this? And what's the outcome? What's supposed to be better? Because I didn't feel better. I was still brain fogged, still exhausted, right? And I had that weird sneeze, a smelly sneeze. And I'm a very results oriented person. I mean, I think that's one of the good things about that technical background. You want to know that whatever is going on is working. The thing, though, Margaret, that was most disconcerting to me was that when I asked them a direct question, like what's in these injections and what are the benefits, they couldn't answer. They just wanted to shoot me up every week, check their little box, send it to insurance, and that was the end of the exchange. And I was like, okay, guys, pump the brakes. This is not working for me. So from there, my fiance was paying attention to how I was feeling and all. He said, hey, you know what, babe? There's a guy that I work with. He was at Intel at the time, the chip manufacturer that has similar symptoms to yours, but he's much better. Why don't you go see the person he saw, who was a licensed doctor of naturopathic medicine, right? So in Oregon, called a naturopathic physician. Physician versus doctor is very much a political thing, so we're not going to get into that right now. That depends on the details of your state's regulatory mechanism. So I went to see him, and after 3 visits, Margaret, I was so much better. And I was really shocked because after a year and a half of losing my health, I got it back quick. And I was like, huh. So he used homeopathy, biofeedback, and in that first visit, he actually listened to me, looked me in the eye, listened to me for an hour. I had never had that happen in any of the health encounters I'd had my entire life. And I was like, what is this? So then I started doing some wild grafting with an herbalist, et cetera. Just so curious. And I learned more and more about naturopathic medicine and herbalism in the Pacific Northwest, et cetera. And so a few years later, I went back to school to become licensed doctor of naturopathic medicine. That's the story.
Amazing. Wow, that is a fascinating story. I think, so many of us, it's our personal health that just takes that career and you're like, nope,
Yep.
I'm supposed to be doing this. Now, within that, what is it about blood sugar specifically that intrigues you so much? Because I mean, there's no end of work in it. The field, it seems that unfortunately, it doesn't seem like things are getting better in this area, despite all of the science and innovations and all of this. We can dig into that a little bit. But what is it about this, the diabetes and prediabetes, that intrigued you so much?
Yeah, so there's two answers to the question. So part A is I couldn't help but notice in the 90s and into the 2000s, certainly the first part of the 2010s, how much of a big uptick there was, a big upswing in the number of people coming in clinically who already had either type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. Seeing such a big shift, because it used to be most of my practice was heart disease, sleep problems and disorders, sleep apnea, stress issues, gut issues. It really shifted towards the blood sugar world. And as I looked at the stats, the data, from NIH and CDC here in the US, I was like, wow. So the same way we saw heart disease take off like a rocket in the 80s and 90s, now we see diabetes, right, becomes a big deal. 2000s, 2010s, and now 2020s. And so many people are walking around with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. They don't even know it. I mean, people just aren't aware yet, and they aren't routinely screened, which I find shocking because these lab tests are like $6 lab tests. We're not talking $50,000 fancy imaging. We're talking a $6 lab test. So, you, myself, others, we all have to educate people on some of the more subtle signs about this. That was one. The other is the more personal journey. In my family, my mother and father divorced when I was about a year old, right? So I'm an infant, I'm a baby. Little kids have no agency. And in that, right, at the time it was probably about three and a half, I lost contact with him. He just stopped coming to visit for any number of reasons. There were family issues, as you might imagine. And I decided to gather up my courage with my amazing husband of now 37 plus years by my side to reconnect with my biological father and his side of the family, or to at least try. And my dear, dear best friend, who unfortunately has passed from this physical plane, was a great guide and inspiration because of her courage to reconnect with her biological father. She had a similar journey to mine. The parents were married, then they divorced, and then, things changed, right? So in that, I still remember knocking on that door and connecting up with him. It was one of those things. And I was so warmly embraced. It's one of the biggest blessings of my life because that's a risk and a half, you guys. If you grew up with both your parents, imagine the terror of someone who's going to knock on that door, whether it's, a situation where you do know who that parent is, or maybe you're adopted. That's a big deal because that could be a primary rejection. I know people for whom this didn't go well, but lucky me, it went well as I got to know them. He's one of 13 siblings. He and all 12 of his siblings, right? So that's 13 kids. They all had some kind of diabetes, including type 1. Who has 100% prevalence of anything?
Wow.
I was shocked. I didn't even know that was possible in a family. So that gave me a big heads up. And I was grateful that I was already an athlete. I had already been doing all this muscle building. I still say it's saving my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I got really invested,
Wow.
quite frankly, was to make sure I'd be well and could live long and live well, and enjoy my old age, and became much more sensitive to the things that are important about that aspect of metabolic health.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So that's a really powerful case study for why we want to prevent these things, right? Like really focusing on that. Now, we've got a practitioner audience here, so they're really aware of some of the basics of blood sugar handling, as well as the absolute paramount importance of supporting their clients in this area. So I do want to unpack and go a little bit deeper into more of the advanced concepts and mechanisms and tools. But I also want to just make sure we're all on the same page. So, we talk a lot about dysregulated blood sugar. So I would love you to share with us just your basic description of what we mean when we say dysregulated blood sugar. And as an addendum to that, are we as concerned about low blood sugar as we are elevated blood sugar? Because I think so much of the focus is on elevated blood sugar, but low blood sugar can be its own thing. So let's just make sure we don't have to spend a lot of time with this, but just making sure we're all on the same page.
Okay, great, great. So with dysregulated blood sugar, it has a variety of ways it can show up, but basically it's when somebody's blood sugar is outside of what's considered typically a healthy range or a healthy response, especially as they eat food or drink a beverage or whatever. So some people drink their calories, they don't necessarily chew them. And so this matters, right? So you want your blood sugar to stay in a healthy green zone range. Like if you were to use a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, or old school, stick your finger, get a drop of blood, put it on the test strip, put that inside the glucometer, look at the reading, right? And if you find that your blood sugar is outside of the healthy ranges during those times, then that really matters. And you're right, Margaret, you're absolutely right. Much of the time, the blood sugar levels that people are more typically alarmed about are the ones where it's high. And I agree with you that the ones where it dips low are also a problem, because there are people who are quite fragile when it comes to carbohydrate metabolism. Sometimes the people who are particularly susceptible to hypoglycemia, the low glycemic moments, if that's a preponderance for them, they often have a family history of poor carbohydrate metabolism. They may have a family history of addiction. They may have a family history of alcoholism. Clinically, I see those paired more typically with the low blood sugar range than I do the hyper blood sugar range, if that helps.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. That's very helpful. Now, when we talk about things like type 2 diabetes, the more advanced progressions, formal diagnosis here, is it truly possible to reverse this? Right? Is this something that we can fully undo? And can you explain to us what you mean by, when we're saying reverse, we can kind of like throw out this language, but like, what does that mean? What does that actually look like?
Sure, great question. So, last year I led the Diabetes Transformation Summit, and this year the Reversing Type 2 Diabetes Summit, right? What I mean and what I think ethical people mean around the word reversal when it comes to type 2 diabetes is that the person gets out of the danger zone. So their A1C is going to drop down and keep dropping down. They continue to make progress. I always say for any of the people I work with, and I encourage you as professionals to think about it this way, it's about progress, not perfection. Type 2 diabetics, pre-diabetics are so used to getting blamed, shamed, discouraged, disparaged, disrespected, right? And judged. Oh my gosh, if those were healing things, there would be no problem. Clearly, those are not healing things. So the problem gets worse. So in that moment, when you have a chance to be of service to someone, it's really important to meet them where they're at. And one of the things that I find vital is with reversal is to make sure, and I'm going to really hammer this point home, because I know for some people, particularly I've seen it on social media, they don't like the word reversal. Other people love it. I think it's a polarizing word. Here's the deal. With reversal, I'm always critically aware, and I try to remind people it's not about magical thinking. Like I've got a masterclass for the general public going right now, and I keep telling people it's about progress, not perfection. No magical thinking. What do I mean by that? Neither I or anybody else is going to sprinkle any magical fairy dust on you and say, whoop, it's reversed. You don't have to pay attention to lifestyle anymore. So if you've done the work, gotten a hold of those 5 lifestyle steps that are so sensitive to get that blood sugar back to a healthy place, great. Guess what? You've got the gift of a lifetime because you now know you have your own secret decoder ring around what works for you. It's usually 2 or 3 out of the 5. Most people do not need to be perfect about all 5. They don't need to be perfect about anything. They need to figure out how to be consistent and to get back on track. And so with that, in that personal, very personal health journey, it's really essential that they understand what reversal means for them. Some of it's going to be guided by data and numbers. So their fasting morning blood sugar numbers, of course, will matter. Their A1C will matter. Their energy levels, their ability to live their life the way they would like to. Things like that come in. And I always tell people, as much as I personally, both as a woman and as an engineer, love data, I feel that everybody has to tune in to their own inner knowing. And so how you feel is more important than what your Oura ring might tell you, your CGM might tell you, or anything else, right?
Yeah. I love that. I think it's so important because I mean, I'm a data junkie. I love data, and we can sometimes let data and number chasing become the end in of itself when we lose sight of the fact that these are tools to help us feel and live our best. And if we're not feeling and living our best and just simply chasing numbers from a ring from the CGM on a lab, then it's kind of missing the point. So I really love that you're like both thinking about this as very, very individual for that unique individual, thinking of it as a journey that there isn't like an end point, right? We always talk about health. It's not something you check off the to-do list and now you're done, right? It's a lifestyle, of course. So I think that's really important. You teased the 5 things. Can you share what the 5 pieces are that you think that these are the core parts of the Yates Protocol, correct?
Correct. So the 5 core steps for the Yates Protocol are nutrition. I think we can all agree nutrition is going to be the bullseye of the target. It is essential for good blood sugar control. Just like personal trainers and exercise folks will say you can't out-exercise a bad diet. You're not going to get good blood sugar control if you don't have good nutrition that's healthy for your blood sugar. And you're absolutely right, Margaret. There are bio-individual responses that are outliers or unusual responses. So someone can eat an otherwise quote unquote healthy diet, but maybe what is going on with Zoom? We got to fix this. But with that, this is hilarious.
I love it.
This is one of the things about Silicon Valley. They just do too much sometimes down here. But anyway, must have been a Zoom update. But anyway, with that, there are people who can eat a healthy nutritional plan and find that they're not getting good blood sugar control. And they are so upset because they're like, wait, hold on, I'm eating this healthy food. Why am I not well? And some people don't have typical healthy blood sugar reactions to things like, say, cauliflower, broccoli, kale, blueberries, quinoa, things that we might routinely recommend, thinking that that's going to be, a great option for the person we're trying to help. The other 4 steps will be meal timing. I am a big fan of various forms of fasting, including intermittent fasting, fasting mimicking diets, etc., because I feel like we get so many clues as humans around the planet across all cultures. There's a few things we all have in common. Fasting is one of them. Whether it's a cultural tradition, a religious tradition, a spiritual tradition, community, however it's based, fasting is part of the human folklore that is a great thing. And in today's 24/7 world, where we can get access in many parts of the world to food, and unfortunately, often low quality or kind of crappy food, this is a problem. We really do need to take a break. Our ancestors were not in that environment. And, if you think about human health, the big deal then was clean water, regular access to food, right? So we've solved some of that. Now we've got a different set of problems, right? So now we talked about 2 steps. Nutrition's one, meal timing is another. The third is going to be stress. Stress is a bully. I describe it as it grabs you by your genetic collar and slams you up against the wall of your epigenetic expression. In other words, whatever is lurking in your genes that could be a weak link for you is what's likely to show if you are vulnerable to the effects of stress. And some of us are far more vulnerable to stress than others. You can imagine, depending on how long you are in your clinical work, that the stress profile of someone who's a preschool teacher is going to be different than the stress profile of someone who is a Navy SEAL or a first responder or a surgeon, because it just makes sense. They have different lives, right? So that's part of it. So step 4 is sleep. Sleeping is healing, and healing is sleeping. You have to have great quality sleep. And it's the opportunity every day for your blood sugar to hit the reset button. Your soul hits the reset button. Your mind hits the reset button. And in fact, that's where those amyloid plaques and things clear, particularly during those first stages of sleep when you get that deep sleep, right? Your gut resets. Everything resets with sleep. And if your sleep is terrible, it's going to be much harder to have a healthy blood sugar, and it has to be addressed. I find a lot of times with diabetics, no one talks to them about their sleep. And then the fifth piece is the thing you can all guess, which is going to be exercise and strength training, because active working muscles are blood sugar sponges. You know, you can exercise all you want. If you haven't taken care of the other four steps, especially nutrition, stress, and or sleep, meal timing, exercise by itself will not save you. I know plenty of people exercise quite well. They're consistent with it, but they still have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. It's not enough.
Yeah, this is okay. I've like 100 follow-up questions here. So I want to dig in. Let's start first with diet. And, this is a community of nutrition professionals. So we're digging in with diet all the time. We know very much that what works for one person does not work for the next person. I want to talk a little bit about the use of CGMs as a really powerful tool in this. And I know that you are an advisor to our favorite CGM, Thea. Yay. Those of you who have not heard it, we can send you the recording. It's actually on our website, a recording of our interview with Boris, the founder of Thea, fantastic CGM. But what I would love to talk with you about is how are you using this really specifically to dial in the diet? And do you pair it with other dietary, like what is your foundational dietary strategy? Are you leaning to a ketogenic diet? Are you moving, is there a platform overall that you start from in terms of your dietary starting point and then customize it based on the CGM? Or how are you manipulating that? Because we know, coffee for one person is going to spike their blood sugar, but the next person, it does nothing. As you said, cauliflower can spike it for one person and does nothing for the next person. So how are you making some of those decisions clinically?
That's a great question. So how I start out is with a basic foundation of things that I find for most people are going to be helpful and not provoking an adverse glycemic response, right? We're trying to get people out of trouble and get them out of there quickly. Usually I work with people for 3 months at a time. For those with complex situations, 6 months at a time, right? So we've got a clear time window to get from A to B. And in that, I find it important that they understand some really basic relationships about how our bodies respond to macronutrients. And then from there, we layer in what it is that they enjoy culturally. I have found that it is a mistake to deprive people of all their cultural context around nutrition, because a lot of us, that's our primary way to enjoy nourishment. And if we take that away from people, it's a mistake. They will resent it. They'll rebel, and eventually they're just going to fall out. They're not going to be able to be successful, right? And none of us wants that. We want people to be able to engage and continue on and do the things they need to do to be well. So in that context, I start out with making sure people understand what are the most blood sugar friendly macronutrients, right? So that's going to be protein, healthy fats, I create my own category called fiber, i.e. leafy greens, right? They feature prominently in anything I do. And then finally, the resistant, slow-burning, complex carbohydrates represented by beans, peas, legumes. You guys know the usual suspects there, right? That's usually going to be where we start. Sometimes people are reluctant, for instance, to eat much in the way of beans and legumes. Maybe they're very flatulent or uncomfortable. And so, that's where we can layer in those tips of make sure you rinse the beans twice, maybe cook them yourself, get a pressure cooker, just take more control over what's actually in that bean so that they can eat it, or start with lentils or chickpeas because those might be much better tolerated, etc. But those are going to be the things, right? So it's going to be protein. It's going to be high fiber, leafy green vegetables. I'm going to carve them out from the rest of the vegetables. So things like squash, other things that typically have a higher glycemic profile will wait on that, because I'm really trying to make sure we have some success with the things least likely to cause any sort of a spike. We add in fruit, fresh fruit in season, ideally local and organic, as makes sense. And as their blood sugar shows, they tolerate it. Some people do quite well with fresh fruits. Some people not so much. Yeah. I always make sure they understand, leave the skin on. Don't peel the apple. Don't peel the peach, blah, blah, blah. Leave the skin on. If you're going to make a smoothie, put the banana in, get an organic banana, ideally rinse the peel, because you never know what else it's been exposed to. That's today's world. This is complicated. Put the peel and the banana in the blender, et cetera, right? Just we're really trying to amp up the nutrients and the fiber because for a lot of people, their nutrition is pretty devoid of fiber, is often missing, and often they have nowhere near enough protein going in. It's been what I've seen. We start there and then we course correct as need be.
And the course correcting is where you bring in the CGM. So would you bring in, for example, you would make these foundational dietary changes first, let their system kind of recalibrate to that for maybe like a month or something like this, and then bring it in? Or are you bringing in the CGM right from day one?
If they can do it, we'll do it right from day one because we'll get where we need to go faster. And I really appreciate what Thea has brought to the party because over the years, I have to tell you honestly, you guys are health professionals, so I can just tell you full disclosure.
Yeah.
I've had patients for years with them knowing it, not me, emailing, texting, sending DMs with pictures of their CGM reports, screenshots of the app, giving me spreadsheets, pictures of what they eat. They are just desperate to get that information across the net. So when I was first introduced to Thea earlier this year, I was like, hey, God, somebody has this in a HIPAA compliant place. Because I'm not breaking the HIPAA. They are,
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Totally. Well, this is fantastic. And I love that you then, Laren, because I had a question about the meal timing and if you were using, time restricted feeding windows and intermittent fasting, how you were building that in. So I guess my next question about that is, do you introduce that right out the gate as well? Or are you holding off until they have let go of some of their dependence on some of these carbs? One of the things that we sometimes notice clinically is when people are still really in that sugar cycle, that if we do something like bring in time restricted feeding too early, it's really challenging for them because they haven't learned that metabolic flexibility yet. Their systems have not done that yet. So they just miss the starch and they have all those symptoms of pulling carbs out. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I would agree with you. There is such a thing as too soon. People who are used to lots of simple carbs and they're not familiar with complex carbs, people who don't like the green leafy vegetables, etc., you need to get those pieces put together first, the complex carbs along with the leafy greens, the proteins, the healthy oils. Then you can introduce the time restricted eating, intermittent fasting, things like that, because they'll be closer to having restored metabolic flexibility. They won't be so miserable. And you're also in that process, frankly, you're buying them time and getting them on the healing path because you're re-educating the taste buds on their tongue. The tongue and the brain are always in conversation. Like if somebody comes to you and they say, oh yeah, no, I don't drink soda, doc. I drink diet soda all day long, though. Wow. It's right. So they've done nothing but jackhammer sweetness into their brain. It takes time to undo that. Thank goodness the taste buds turn over quick. They turn over every 10 to 14 days, research has shown. And I've seen with most people, within that 2-week window or so, they can really start to shift their preferences for taste quickly and get out of that sweet trap, because it's a trap.
Yeah, totally. 100% agree. What I want to do is I actually want to take a step back for a second and think about, when we, as clinicians, we're always evaluating when a new client comes in and we're doing that in original intake and we're thinking about what are the most pressing issues. And there are certain things that we automatically think about and associate with blood sugar. Examples, things like someone with stubborn weight issues, their energy's in the toilet, they're having trouble sleeping, they've got hormonal issues, if they've got, that sort of part of that overall metabolic health or not ill health that leads to cardiovascular events. But my question for you is, beyond some of these more obvious and direct connections, and these things that are downstream results of poor blood sugar handling, are there other health issues that are connected either directly or indirectly to poor blood sugar handling that we might be missing as clinicians, where we're not necessarily jumping straight to blood sugar handling? We're thinking of other things, but that blood sugar dysregulation could actually be playing a really pivotal role in that physiological manifestation?
Yeah, definitely. Two things come to mind to me immediately. One is that much of the dysregulation we see with glycemic control often precedes the onset of clear issues with cognition, whether it is mild cognitive impairment or MCI, or the pathway that leads to dementia, including Alzheimer's, a subtype of dementia, right? That whole pathway. That's why we call type 3 diabetes Alzheimer's, because often the blood sugar jumble precedes the clear onset of those problems. That's one. Another thing to consider with this is mental health issues, things where people say they are profoundly anxious, they're deeply depressed, things like that. Sometimes that's blood sugar issues. And one of the things I appreciate, for instance, about Thea and things like that is that with the CGM and the software and the data, you can look and see, and people can on the app as one example, since your community is familiar with this and using it, hey, they can actually select I'm feeling anxious or I feel brain fogged or whatever. I feel fabulous. Like you can make your own list of stuff and really get to understand where that blood sugar is showing up. I know there's a lot of people who have decided that they are anxious and it's probably blood sugar. I'd love if all of us could get a hold of them and help them because it really drives people's behaviors. I've often wondered how many people lose their jobs, lose their love relationships, lose this, that, and the other thing in the social emotional realm because of blood sugar hangry behavior. They're irritable, they're crabby, or they're so depressed nobody can get them up off the couch. They're deeply fatigued. That's a whole nother category, and there's a real reason for that. Just to have a little more compassion and empathy for our fellow humans, but also to be of better service to people.
100%. It's funny as you're talking about this, I remember way back in the day, long before I studied nutrition, I mean, the blood sugar roller coaster was such a thing. And I would be in meetings and I was very animated and dynamic most of the time, but I would have these blood sugar crashes that I didn't know what was happening, but I would just tune out and I just sort of stop talking and get spacey. And my colleagues knew to like quietly push some chocolate in front of me and I would eat it and then come back to life. So, you talk about the cognitive piece. It's such an important piece that I think we don't think of immediately to go to blood sugar issues when we're dealing with that. But that's really great points. I want to shift a little bit and I want to talk about AGEs, our advanced glycation end-products. Can you explain to us how they're created? Can we measure them? That's a big question. And then what we can do about them. And is there anything specific that we're doing beyond the 5 pieces in your protocol?
Sure. So AGEs, or advanced glycation end products, right? Fancy way of saying these are the clear, tangible results of the cross-linking that goes on between the excess glucose in the bloodstream and the proteins that naturally occur in the bloodstream, right? They should be able to slip, slide, move by each other. Ideally, to be specific, insulin sitting as a receptor on the cell wall sees glucose go by, grabs it up, brings it inside the cell and make it available as energy. However, if the person's glycemic control is not so good, or if it's truly broken, that's not working out. So then insulin, after a while, doesn't really work as well. It's becoming more resistant or less sensitive. So as the person loses insulin sensitivity and as insulin resistance increases, more and more glucose is floating by on the outside of the perimeter of the cell wall, not getting inside the cell for energy. This is where a lot of that fatigue and exhaustion issue comes in for diabetics. And instead, that extra blood sugar now is available elsewhere. There's a number of problems with that. One is that the body, if it has too much glucose on a regular basis, starts to store it typically in the liver or in the abdominal visceral fat. Both places lead to more inflammation. So the production of these AGEs, or advanced glycation end products, boosts inflammation. This is why this particular metabolic dysregulation has crossover to heart disease and also has crossover to cancer. They share that inflammatory profile, unfortunately. In my opinion, they're the big 3 for metabolic dysregulation. And in that process, what's happening is instead of the normal exchange, let's say, of hemoglobin is inside your red blood cells. Hemoglobin grabs up oxygen, brings it in for you, and releases carbon dioxide. And it's an absolutely beautiful thing. Thank goodness we don't have to consciously manage all this. What happens is if you have too much blood sugar, too much glucose, then that natural release, that function of the hemoglobin to grab that oxygen and release the carbon dioxide gets gummed up. As that gets more and more gummed up or glycated, cross-linked, that exchange is not happening as efficiently. So instead of 100% efficiency, you're dropping to 80, 70, 60, 50%. It gets worse. You get the idea. As such, it means then your natural energy production is down. Your carbon dioxide percentage in the blood is probably going up a bit, probably not enough to land you in the ER, but sure enough for you to not get the full benefit of oxygenation you so richly deserve and need. This also means that you have that many more of these AGEs, or advanced glycation end products, which become big. So instead of just the size of glucose or just the size of insulin together, right, or hemoglobin, so sitting on top of that hemoglobin molecule outside, there'll be these little spikes, if you will, of the glucose. It becomes this much bigger complex. So instead of something being like this size going through the bloodstream, you got something going through like that. This is much bigger than just that, just to give you an idea. So as such, your vasculature, your blood flow starts to get compromised. This means then the end circulation now is the first places this compromised blood flow or vasculature is going to show up. So it's going to be the eyes. Diabetic retinopathy and blindness is probably the number one fear of people who have diabetes. I'm going to say that again. Blindness and loss of vision is probably the number one fear. As far as I know, the research has shown that of people who have diabetes. Make sure when you're talking to people that you are addressing their pain points, because this is what they're actually afraid of. Believe it or not, it's not gangrene and losing their toes, feet. I mean, I'm just shocked that that's not number one, but it's not.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I can understand that if I had to choose between my vision and I'm a runner. I don't know, but if I couldn't see, it's a hard choice.
You're a runner.
Please don't take my toes. They can take my fingers. No, we want to keep
don't
all
take anything.
Don't take anything. So thank you so much for explaining that. You do such an incredible job. And is there a way to test for AGE specifically?
Yes, there's a glycation test. I want to say glycation C. I don't want to misspeak. Let me double check something, because I might not quite have that name at the tip of my tongue. Right before I hopped on here, my head was in the land of thyroid, trying to help out a patient. Symptoms, testing, advanced glycation end-products. Yeah. So you can do testing for it, and I believe it is, no, Google, stop being silly. Yeah, so you can look for glycation C and other end products. The hemoglobin A1C as a test, in my opinion, is not enough. It's not enough. It's a lovely marker. It's not the only marker.
Brilliant segue to my next set of questions, because I want to talk about the metrics that we should be looking at here. So we think of the basics: fasting glucose, hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin.
Yeah.
They give us a good sense, but is this enough? And what other markers should we be assessing, as well as when do we bring in those additional markers? Right. I have some ideas of markers, but I want to hear yours that you go to first off, and then I'll ask about any if you haven't mentioned them.
Yeah. And then it's just trying to autocorrect for me. How annoying. Here, let me copy this in. Get the right spelling. Yes, LabCorp, other companies have GLYC and capital A as a lab test. Another one is to look at C-peptide, which I think is a good idea, because there are people who are misdiagnosed. I was in contact with a woman who used to be in a Facebook group I was in. I had started a 21-day blood sugar challenge years ago for people, just to get them excited and energized and moving and focusing on this. And she had reached out, sent me a DM. And so she had been diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic about 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. Long story short, her endocrinologist made a mistake. And I was shocked, because those are super specialists. I was like, your endocrinologist made a mistake? What do you mean made a mistake? So how this was found out, and this might resonate with the people that you serve, put this story in your pocket, because you might run into this. She was diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic, goes to the doctor. Her A1C is steadily getting worse. She's actually following the advice. She's taking the prescription meds. She's doing at least some lifestyle things as best she knows how to do. It's getting worse. It's not even holding the A1C where it was. It's getting worse. Okay. So she comes in to see the endocrinologist, who reads her a new one, really, really reads her the riot act, says, you're not taking care of yourself. You're not taking your meds. Doesn't ask her if she's doing any of this, just makes the assumption, well, she's all, and again, the blaming, the shaming, the disparagement that goes on for diabetics. And so she's feeling terrible, but she's like, doc, I'm doing everything I can. So finally he gets quiet and listens, sends her off for some more testing, discovers she's actually not a type 2 diabetic. She's a type 1. He missed it. He flat out missed it. Her daughter's already a type 1, and the family doesn't have much money. So they're literally sharing insulin.
Wow.
And I'm just like, when I run into these stories, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So yeah. So hemoglobin A1C, fasting morning blood sugars, the glyc-A lab test to get an idea of these glycation end products, C peptides, you have a sense of what is going on. Are there any reserves left? Is the person's pancreas putting out insulin? Like, where are they on there? I think it's good that we make sure these tests are being ordered, whether you order it, if it's part of your licensure or certification, or somebody else orders it. It's good to just like be like that guardian angel sitting on their shoulder to give them some insight so that your patient knows. Like the woman I was just working with right before I got on this call, who's had quite a journey with her thyroid situation. We worked on her insulin resistance years ago, and for her, it actually worked. She lost a lot of weight, and she has been able to keep it off now for 17 years. And she had all the skin around her belly. She got rid of it because she had faith in herself to keep her metabolic health high. And so right now we're back paying attention to her thyroid to make sure she's still good. She is, I want to say, 68, I do believe. So, she's been working with me a long time. We know each other very well. So she also knew I had a webinar. I was like, I got to get you going and I got to go.
Right. So I think most folks are familiar with fasting glucose, fasting insulin, what the hemoglobin A1C. So that's that longer term blood sugar marker. And we've now talked about the glycate. Can you just explain a little bit more about what that C peptide is and how it fits in? Like, what information is it giving you that's different? And how, for example, just in that example that you gave, misdiagnosed from type 2 to type 1, like what is it about this marker that helps make that differentiation?
Yeah, so to help make that differentiation, what you're trying to find out typically is that distinction between type 1 or type 2. So it'll also help to determine how well a diabetes treatment is working. Basically, you're trying to assess, is the pancreas making insulin? Because that's a primary question and a key differentiator between type 1 and type 2. It's worth checking. It is possible, I think, for someone to truly start as a type 2 and become a type 1, because it could be there early in their journey as a type 2, and over time maybe their autoimmune system is attacking that pancreas, and then you would probably see that their A1C would gradually worsen. And so, please give people respect and ask them, what are they doing? Are they taking their meds? Are they on any meds, right? What are their lifestyle measures? And find out if they are diligent and they are following their instructions and there's a certain outcome that was expected and they're not getting it. It's time to look for some other things that might be wrong, because we don't live life in a test tube. We aren't static beings. We're dynamic beings. And sometimes people's health does change,
Do you have an optimal range? I see Rachel's got this question. Do you have an optimal range for C-peptide?
I look at whatever the reference range is for the lab.
Okay.
Most of the time, reference ranges, because over the years, I have to say, 30 plus years clinical, I've seen reference ranges for things change, and sometimes they change by region here in the US or different parts of the world. So I would always look at the reference range for whatever lab company did the test. And I love to see people in the middle, so I know that they're in a good place. If they're like borderline, I'm like, because you might be catching a problem as it's starting to manifest and make itself obvious.
What about fructosamine or leptin? Are you taking a look at those ever?
I have not made a habit of looking at fructosamine. I'd be curious to know what the thoughts are that you might have, Margaret, other people in your community. In terms of leptin, I love to teach people about leptin and ghrelin. I call those two the twin gremlins. This as a play on word and make it a little more interesting for the general public. Since we're here with professionals, I know you guys know, ghrelin is about growling, about the empty stomach or feeling true hunger. And, leptin is about satiety. Does the person feel satisfied? Can they tell when they're full and they've had enough to eat? For some people, that is broken. Both leptin and ghrelin are out of balance. I think those are the people who often benefit the most from some of these GLP-1 agonist medications, whether it's Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy, other names for them, tirzepatide, semaglutide, et cetera, because it quiets the food noise in their brain, and that's a gift. I think that those are a good thing. I do think that pharmaceuticals have a place. They aren't the end-all be-all. You still want the lifestyle side, but I would not keep someone from a medication that might be completely life-saving for them if they are otherwise out of control. If I were to prescribe anything like that, I would absolutely be sure they understood those 5 lifestyle steps that are so sensitive for metabolic control, for blood sugar, and in particular for the people doing things like, injectable Mounjaro, injectable Ozempic, all of them. Make sure they're doing the weight training and they're building up that precious muscle mass. because if they don't have it, if they ever discontinue those drugs, either because of the cost or whatever, they're going to be in trouble. They have got to build their muscle mass. People are not being given, in my opinion, the whole story with this.
When you are working with, so most of the clinicians on this call are not prescribing, some are prescribing, but most are not. So when we're working with somebody with the diet and they really have optimized the diet and the client is demonstrating that through, whether it's food journaling or just, they're really, they're being on point about that. And those blood sugar levels are either not shifting or sometimes they shift, but then all of a sudden nothing has changed and everything just goes haywire again. What are some of the next steps? If somebody isn't able to prescribe, what are some of the next steps? What are the next things that you would be unpacking there as to why we're seeing such continued dysregulation despite a really clean diet? Let's assume that you've used the CGM to optimize all the things.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so with that foundation, which is a beautiful foundation, now with confidence, you can look at these other aspects of lifestyle, right? Find out if the person has anything unusual going on in their life. Did they just move? It could be for a great reason. It could be because they got evicted, whatever. Did they move? That is a stressor. Have they had surgery? Surgery will send blood sugar completely out, catastrophic levels for a few weeks, and then the dust hopefully settles, right? Are they under financial duress? Are they feeling stressed from the money realm? That will absolutely make a difference for people, right? Because their self and their safety in the world might be feeling really threatened. Another thing to look at would be, have they had anything unusual happen? Are they getting divorced? Maybe they're in a new relationship and they are just in love with the other person, but maybe that person's family is not so cool, right? There can be issues there. Yeah. There's no lab test for those things, but they are things to consider because they make a difference and can play havoc with blood sugar numbers. Usually, though, that's relatively temporary. It's usually for a few weeks, maybe months, depending on it, Yeah, it depends on if there's other factors that are turbulent in that person's life, because that can absolutely show up in blood sugar issues. Like you said, that blood sugar roller coaster, like, oh, here we go.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very helpful. Are there certain supplements, herbs, nutrients that you like to bring in to support this process?
Yeah, the supplements for some things are essential. So the ones that I work with, particularly for people who have diabetes, who are really fatigued, they just cannot get up off the couch and exercise. I always love them up. I encourage them, and I make sure that I nutrify them. They need more nutrients, right? So as much as we work with food, which is fantastic, I also add in supplements specifically for that. So I work from the point of view of energizing them at the cellular level, thinking about those advanced glycation end products and the fact that the hemoglobin, and we know hemoglobin A1C is unhappy, so we know that exchange, right? If oxygen and carbon dioxide is not right, we also know that their heme is all gummed up with the extra glucose. So instead, I'm saying, okay, let's feed the mitochondria inside the cell. The two, possibly three best ways to do it. Number 1 and 2. One is to use D-ribose as a mitochondrial fuel. I've seen fantastic work with that. Cross over to anybody who has a cardiovascular risk, particularly with congestive heart failure. This is a go-to supplement. Number 2 is going to be resveratrol, usually the trans isomer form. Generally, the research has shown that to be around 300 to 700 milligrams as an isolated isomer. Okay, that's a great one. You can research all this stuff to your heart's delight. Look it up. The D-ribose amounts are going to be 5 grams daily, sometimes 10 grams. I do that by body weight. And I also take into account how big is the person's frame. So let's say someone is 5'2" and weighs 250 pounds. I'm going to give them more because they have more body mass. I measure that. And then as their weight and other things improve, then we can start to drop that dose down because there's less of them to nourish that way, right? It just makes sense. I found that to be similar to the way, you would dose things with children. If any of you serve a pediatric population, you know how sensitive it is to the age of the child and the liver's maturity, its ability to break things down, and body weight, right? And I don't know why we get away from that with adults. I think it's kind of silly. Give people a one size fits all for things. So with supplements, I look at it like that. Number 3 on my list, and I use this sometimes, not all the time, is ubiquinol. Ubiquinol is the downstream metabolite of coenzyme Q10. I was overjoyed I think I was reading, was it Science News? Something like that. I was reading something at home. My second child was maybe 6 months old, and I saw that they had cracked the human genome and some other good news. And one of the things they found out was some of the people who genomically are at risk for cardiovascular disease are also vulnerable to not converting coenzyme Q10 all the way to ubiquinol, because ubiquinol is the end form of CoQ10.
Yeah.
This then set up light bulbs in my head. Here I am holding my baby. I'm like, wow, looking at this report, because I realized the people I'd seen at the first parts of my clinical journey in the 90s who'd come into the clinic with like bags full of supplements, they all had coenzyme Q10, yet they were all heart disease patients. And I was like, I don't think all of these supplements are crappy supplements. What's going on? Well, it turns out they probably genetically were not so good at converting coenzyme Q10 all the way to ubiquinol. Aha, light bulb went off in my head. So then as I resumed my practice, the kids are off to school, preschool, kindergarten, they're on that journey. Mommy goes back to work full time. And then I started giving people ubiquinol, and I started to see fantastic results in those cardiovascular patients. I was like, I've cracked the code. I've got it. So I'm telling you, this is my cheat code. I'm sharing this with you. Generally, it's going to be 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams, again, based on body size. Okay. You can even go as high as 200 milligrams, especially if someone is in serious trouble and is now eligible for a heart transplant if they happen to have congestive heart failure. Don't be shy. Give them more.
Right. Really fascinating. And it's an interesting approach. So one of the things, a lot of times when we're thinking about supplementation for blood sugar handling, we're thinking about things that are going to sort of force down those blood sugar levels, like berberine or an inositol or something like this. And you're
those are
really
great.
Approaching it. And yeah, they are. And I love the way that you're approaching it from just like really feeding and nourishing the cells. I think that's a really cool approach. I want to make sure. Yeah, I want to make sure we have, I see a bunch of questions have been coming in as you've been chatting from our audience. So I want to make sure we get through as many of these as possible. Sure. We have two related questions here regarding fasting. So Laura's asking about what are your thoughts on fasting for cycling women? And then Adina adds in relation to this, do your recommendations change for menopausal women?
Okay. Oh, cycling as in menstrual cycling. Okay, I thought
menstrual
you meant
cycling. Oh, bicycling. Nope, we're talking.
All right, I was like, I can go get on my spin bike. Okay, I get it. Yeah. That is a good question. Let's see. Cycling women. Well, I think fasting for cycling women can be done. I think it needs to be done with care, because women aren't small men. So much of what's out and available on the internet streets is really geared towards the male body, the male physiology. And I've certainly observed, I remember for my own menstrual cycle, that week right before the menstrual flow started was a really sensitive time, and something that myself and, my fiance and now husband of 37 years, he cracked the code on this one, was to make sure I ate lots of leafy greens that week before my period was due. Because I think, back in the day, I'm an older woman, that was probably mopping up extra estrogen metabolites. I'll bet dollars to donuts that what was going on in my case, right? So I think for fasting, I think it's probably going to be a little easier in the first half of the cycle. Now, I'm not an OB-GYN. That's not my area of expertise. But I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't the same. And I know there are some people who are pretty famous on the internet for focusing in on fasting for women as a different thing. And so I would go with what they have to say about it. Now, when it's menopause time and, the dust has settled and the hormones have settled and you are no longer releasing blood on a regular basis or perhaps irregular basis, right? Like your menstrual cycle has come to an end. I think then you could go forward with fasting quite safely and do it as it fits your lifestyle. So if you're super stressed, that's probably not the time to do it. Yeah. Let yourself have the chance to have that metabolic reset along with that spiritual reset that comes with fasting. Don't put too many demands on yourself. What I see a lot of times, Margaret, in today's world, particularly for us as women, is that everybody is pulling on you. They want something. They aren't coming to give anything. They're just coming to suck you dry. And you have to be careful about that. And I always remind all of my patients, male or female, but especially the women, that the word no is a complete sentence.
Yeah. Yes, we all need to hear that, I'm sure. Oh, goodness. There's a related question here that Liz asks about fasting for pregnant women with gestational diabetes. I'm assuming because
No,
pregnant. No. Yeah.
you never fast a pregnant woman. This is one of the things that all of the old time naturopathic doctors said, all of the midwives I've ever worked with said, etc. You do not. The metabolic demands with that growing fetus in that woman's body are such that that's just dangerous and miserable. You would focus with her nutrition, make sure she's getting great sleep, getting stress out of her life. She might have to fire people in her life, whatever it takes, protect that mama to be, but you do not fast a pregnant woman. Too risky. That's not the way that, in my opinion, to attack gestational diabetes. That's a no.
Yeah. So, question about talking more and the nourishing part.
Mm-hmm.
So, most of us here, and this is another question here about this, she uses an omnivore approach, as most of us do in our practice. But
Yeah.
what do you think about you have those clients, the vegan or vegetarian approaches? Is it inevitable that this style of eating is too carb heavy? And is there a way to balance protein and fats on a vegan and vegetarian diet?
Oh, what a great question. Okay. So for vegans and vegetarians, I always make sure people define for me what they are calling vegan or vegetarian so that we're all talking about the same thing.
Yep.
And I always try to make sure that for vegetarians and vegans, that they're not carboholics. I don't want to see them eating nonstop grains all day, every day. There's no vegetables, etc. And I've seen sometimes in the health food stores just some strange options like organic corn dogs and all. And I'm like, a vegan corn dog? Okay, stop. Why mimic a meat kind of a food? First off, it's not a great meat food. Why would you even bring this into the world of a vegan or a vegetarian, right? Because to have a vegan or vegetarian diet, certainly as it's seen in an international sense with other cultures, it's quite healthy. It's robust. It's going to have your beans, peas, and legumes, your nuts and seeds, your healthy oils, leafy greens for days, etc. So it's interesting how that gets, kind of perverse here. And I realize people are probably from all over the world in this community, but for those who are US centric, you know what I'm saying. So I think it's important that people are robust. And if you're going to be a vegan or a vegetarian, please be a vegan or a vegetarian and eat the full spectrum of foods that are available to you. I don't legislate that people become plant-based. If they want to, that's great. I do have people usually start at an omnivore place. I have historically attracted mostly omnivores. I have had some people come in who started off as vegan or vegetarian. Some of them, it agrees really well with them. They're plant-based and it's working. Typically, though, they're not coming in with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. If they are a vegan or vegetarian and they have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, then we have to have an open-hearted discussion about whether or not this is working for them. If they're anemic, if they're pregnant, things like that. I'm like, because your body has very specific demands in whatever window you're in metabolically. And if you're not able to meet it, I mean, I understand people's philosophical alignment with things. I think that's a beautiful thing. And I say, hey, maybe we need to repurpose some of that intention and energy and make sure you have the nourishment that you need. I have some dear friends when we were in Portland metro area, we'd had dinner together at least once a week, et cetera. And they were devout, very sincere vegetarians. And both of them found out that not only were they anemic, they had some other health problems. And they both decided that they would first introduce seafood. And then eventually they went on to other kinds of flesh foods. And their health really returned. Mm-hmm. They got a lot better and stayed better. And so I feel like we can't fight with who we are. Some of us can thrive and be plant-based, truly a vegetarian or a vegan. And others of us are going to be sick, and vice versa. There are people who eat probably much more meat than they need to. And they need to have a lot more vegetables, right? You have to decide and determine who are you, what frame are you in right now, and what does that frame need?
Right. Absolutely. And I think this is one of the places where things like CGMs, as well as just checking in on your labs regularly, can be very, very insightful because the numbers don't lie. I think the one food that I've never seen anybody be able to tolerate with a CGM is oatmeal. I don't know if you've ever seen somebody actually not have a crazy response. I mean, I've seen people work oatmeal where they started with oatmeal and then they were like, well, let me add a few more nuts. Well, let me add a little bit more of this. Let me add a little bit more of that. And they end up with like this tiny little bit of oatmeal and like all the other things that they've added to it to try to be able to tolerate it. But I've never seen somebody actually tolerate straight up oatmeal. I'm sure they exist, but I think that the CGMs and these tools can be very helpful in showing somebody if they're eating a style of diet that's just not working for them. And it's less about the personal views that they could, this is where hard data can be invaluable.
I agree. I agree. I find that oatmeal and things like that sometimes can be such trouble. Yeah. And it's often a starting place for diabetic recommendations for what to eat for breakfast. It's a terrible
I know.
recommendation.
It's
I've never known what it's based on.
I know, right? Ellen's asking if CGMs are covered by insurance for someone who is pre-diabetic, so not formally diagnosed with diabetes yet. Do you know that?
Okay, Alan. So here's the scoop. Far as I know, based on today, because I get to hear from a lot of people from many different parts of the world and the country. My understanding is in the US, if you are diagnosed with prediabetes, insurance might not cover. Depends on the details of your plan. Your doctor might not be willing to write a prescription, or the nurse practitioner, whoever it is that would write the script. Some practices, some places, some physicians and nurses, et cetera, are happy to write a CGM prescription because they want you to have the data. Others will be like, no, why do you want to know? My understanding is for people who have Medicare, so age 65 and older, whatever the cutoff threshold is there, that you have to have an A1C of 9.0 or higher. Basically, your blood is maple syrup in order to qualify to have a
Wow.
CGM paid for. Now, this could change between politics and public policy here in the US. This all is a hot mess. So it depends on what you've got going on. Sometimes it's so much better to just decide you're going to pay cash. The people that I've worked with as patients or clients in other parts of the country or wherever they may be often just say, you know what, I'm just going to pony up the cash. This is why Thea, because their offer, I think it's $75 per sensor.
Mhm.
It's as good of a price as you'd get like from GoodRx or from Costco, right? It's affordable. It's within range. Some people will have a copay with their insurance of like $35. Sometimes you can get two CGMs for the month at $35. These things vary by policy. I am not an insurance person. I don't play one on TV, so I won't hazard that guess, but it's worth checking out the details.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do want to put in another plug for Thea there because getting the data from CGM to you as the clinician is such a hurdle with basically every other tool and app that is out there. And that is such a pain point that's solved. So, huge fans of that. Well, Dr. Yates, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been
You're
just
welcome.
fantastic. Such great insights. I love the way that you explain things. I don't think I've ever heard somebody explain advanced glycation end products in as graspable a way as you did. So thank you. Thank you so much for this. This
You're
is
welcome.
fantastic. How can people connect with you and get more Dr. Beverly?
Yeah, sure. So we're switching between websites. So if you go to naturalhealthcare.com, you can connect with me there.
Oh, did you
Um,
score that URL?
yeah. You know, I bought that URL back in the 90s. I saw this
Wow.
internet thing coming.
Wow.
Like
Naturalhealthcare.com.
96 or 97, I think.
Wow. Smart. There's the Silicon Valley in you, right?
Right? And the other one would be DR, like the abbreviation for doctor,
Mm-hmm.
Beverly, Beverly, Yates.com, drbeverlyyates.com.
Excellent.
So there you
Excellent.
have it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. For those of you who are hanging around, in a couple of weeks, we have, well, actually, I'm starting to say this and I'm not, I think it's Dr. Jordan Robertson we have up next. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the latest in clinical research. It is awesome. She's fantastic. But this has been incredible. Thank you so much, Dr. Beverly, for all of your insights, for the important work that you're doing in the world. You have a book coming out, The Yates Protocol. Do you know pub date?
I don't know the pub date yet. I'm going to guess it's going to be probably the later part of 2025, or maybe we'll see, second half of 2025, something like that. I'll
Okay.
let you know.
Definitely. Well, definitely. Yeah. Keep us posted. That's wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a really great night. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.